Today was day 2 of the preliminary exam for 6 former Michigan Department of Corrections employees. Now, the MSP, Michigan State Police Detective, who investigated the death of an Alger County Corrections inmate while in custody, testified.
It's a story we continue to follow closely. As a reminder, Scott Sprader, Benny Mercier, Paul Zelenik, Nathan Moser, Barbara Benedict, and John Crane are all charged with involuntary manslaughter. TV6's Justin Van Doff shows us inside the courtroom as the judge continues to weigh whether these charges should move forward.
Michigan State Police Detective Sgt. Jeff Marker told the district court what he saw when he arrived to Alger County Corrections in 2019.
I just noticed that he was extremely skinny, that his hips were protruding and I could see his ribs. Kind of sunken in eyes.
Marker was investigating the events leading up to the death of inmate Jonathan Lancaster while in custody. The main question at hand today, whether the 6 employees neglected visible signs of deteriorating health in Lancaster. The prosecution asked if there were any clear signs of dehydration present.
One of the other observations I made is that he had dry, cracked lips, and so based on what Inspector Contreras had advised me was that he was on a hunger strike. So I was certainly concerned that dehydration and starvation was a possibility.
Meanwhile, the defense pushed back on Marker's authority to make that observation.
Have you ever been enlisted professionally to identify dehydration as a cause of death? Meaning, that's the question.
Okay.
Have you?
Have I ever been consulted?
Yeah.
No.
During cross-examination, the defense lawyer for registered nurse Nathan Moser pushed Marker to confirm her client made an attempt to help Lancaster, but that Lancaster refused it.
He even took in a bottle of Gatorade, and even though policy says he's not supposed to, he tried to make Mr. Lancaster drink.
It appeared that he had some form of some liquid or something in his hand.
Mr. Lancaster clenched his jaws and would not take the fluid.
He indicated that he didn't have it, drink anything else.
Tomorrow is the final scheduled day for the preliminary exam. Justin Van Hoff, TV6 News, Munising.